We will start by discussing the deadlines for 2015 annual owner reporting. You can access this PowerPoint summarizing what is covered today by using the handouts feature located in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right. The email reminder sent out also stated that you'll be able to submit questions during the webinar. That is also on the right. Hopefully, as we're going through the information, a lot of your questions will be answered. If not, we will try to answer as many questions at the end of the presentation. If your questions are not answered during this session or in a follow-up email, you can always contact the Devco Help Desk for assistance. Similar to last year, management companies will be contacted by an OFA staff member via phone or email to check if you're having issues with your 2015 annual owner reporting or using Devco. These staff members are Ashley Walker, Amanda Davidson, and Ryan Reed. You can always reach out to one of your designated staff member if you have any questions using Devco. The 2015 annual owner certification and tenant data are due by March 1st, 2016. Owners should ensure any property changes that have occurred during the 2015 calendar year are entered in Devco Online. New projects or those in the lease-up phase must submit an annual owner certification or tenant data if one or more residents were income qualified during the calendar year of 2015. Projects funded with Ohio Housing Trust funds or other gap financing only properties will need to submit tenant data on just the units that qualify for gap financing. Projects in extended use or after the first 15 years of tax credit compliance are required to report on all rental activity for 2015. This has changed from only reporting on new move-ins in the previous years. This coincides with other changes to the extended use monitoring and reporting. And for more information on those changes to extended use monitoring, you can review the compliance updates that are available on the program compliance part of OFA's website. And I think I already had a question about extended use. Rent updates are definitely going to be the most common event type that you're going to list on extended use. But you would also have your move-ins, move-outs, and transfers. And I also want you to note that the XML uploads are currently disabled in Devco and are anticipated to be functioning next week, shortly after the holiday. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley now to start going through things in Devco.
Okay, let's get started. We will be using one of the test accounts to show Devco Online. We recommend using Internet Explorer while using Devco. Other web browsers can generate errors in the Devco system. So go to the OFA's homepage, which is www.ohiohome.org. And there's a Devco icon on the right side of the page. This Devco page has a link to the Devco portal at the top. I want to point out the Devco Compliance User Guide under the In This section. This guide has all the information we will be discussing today. This is an excellent resource to have at your fingertips. I suggest printing it out. I also want to bring your attention to the Devco videos page. This page contains how-to videos that cover the major areas of Devco used in reporting. The videos include registering in Devco for access, manually entering a tenant event, managing property users, entering a student update or certification, entering a composition update, entering a transfer event, and entering and updating utility allowances and completing an XML upload will be on the website shortly. If you click the Devco online system icon and enter your username and password here at the top, you will be taken to the program page of Devco. Each user in Devco should have their own profile. If you are not registered in Devco, just click the new user link here and follow the instructions. If you have any trouble registering, please contact Devco help. So I'm going to log in here. And once you get logged in, you'll see the program page. Click on the Tenant Income Certification / Owner Certification. This will take you to your property listings page. All of the projects you have approved access for should be listed under properties assigned to you. When you register for Devco, you are required to enter each project you need access to. Each project should have a 2015 and a 2016 certification year available. We want to go to the 2015 year. And again, I'm going to use a test project in Devco. I'm just going to type in the name of the project. And my screen is jumping around, but we're not sure why. Hopefully it'll fix itself. Here we go. So we'll go to the 2015 year. Next, we'll discuss managing users in Devco. When you register for Devco, you're asked about the permissions you want access to. The project owner should always register first in Devco, which all the other users in the project who gives the other users in the project their permissions. The project owner has permissions to manage users, edit information, and finalize a property. In this example, we have Amelia Earhart as our project owner. The next level is property manager. They have permissions to manage users and edit information. Again, here we have Amelia Electroplane as our property manager. Next is the OC editor, who have permissions to edit information on the property. And we have Amelia Putnam as our OC editor. Lastly, the OC viewer can only view information in the property. And we have Amelia Howland as our OC viewer. This is included in the handout that you can access from the webinar session. Unless you are a property owner or manager in Devco, you will not see the current page I'm on or have the manager users link in Devco. So I will push return to property details, and this brings me back to the property details page. This page should have the OFA award or funding for the property listed here. And if your owner entity information and or management company information, which is listed down here, are incorrect, please let your OFA contact know so we can update this for you. On the left side, you should see the property name right here with the building identification numbers or BIN under it. Click the plus sign to view each unit. Make sure all the units and bins are labeled correctly. If a unit is incorrect, Click on the unit and it brings you to the unit information page. If you have market units, make sure you change the unit identity to market on the unit information page, which this one is already a market unit. If a unit needs to be added, click on the bin, and this brings you to the building details page. If a unit is missing, click Add New Unit down at the bottom here to add a unit, but we're going to skip that part. Just click the bin. If you need to delete a unit or if a bin is incorrect, contact your OFA staff member or Devco help for assistance. To return to the property details page, click on the property name, and from the property details page on the right side, you will find the Export Events feature. If you would like to view your progress on entering tenant events, click Export Events. This will only show the events entered for the reporting year you are in. This will give you an overview of all the data you have entered into each unit. This feature replaces the compliance tool datasheet. To convert this chart into an Excel spreadsheet, click Export Events down here. And you can open the spreadsheet from here. I'm just going to cancel it out. You can use this feature to check if you have entered all the events for the year. And once the export is reviewed, you may find some events are missing. If so, return to the property details page, then click on the plus sign next to the unit to see if there are any information from a previous year. Make sure the unit is either correctly listed as vacant, has a move-in event, or has the last event listed for the current household. And in this case, we see the last event listed for the current household. If you see information, it will be grayed out. Make sure the information is correct before adding a new event. Here's some things to keep in mind as you're adding missing events. You need to enter tenant data based upon when it occurred. Do not enter data by event type. For example, if you enter all your move-ins, then go back to enter all the move-outs. If a 2015 resident moved in before January 1st, 2015, their move-in event will need to be entered before you can add an event in the 2015 year. For example, a tenant that moved in 2010, you would go to the 2010 year and enter the unit's move-in information first. Please refer to the tenant income certification or TIC from the tenant's move-in year to enter the correct data. And once you have entered the move-in event for your tenant, you are able to add their updated events in 2015. Make sure you add all applicable events in the property. These could be move-ins, move-outs, recertifications, transfers, student updates, composition updates, and/or rent updates. If your unit has home or Ohio Housing Trust funds, you will need to do a recertification for the unit. So we're going to add an event here. I'm just going to put in a date. Let's see, we have a recertification here. It doesn't matter if 2015 is the year for the full third-party recertification or self-certification. You need to select Recertify as your event type if the unit is qualifying for home or trust funds. When you do a recertification in Devco, you're allowed to change everything but the household income and move-in. Unless there was a rent update or composition update on a different day than your tenant recertified, you can make all the changes during the recertification event. If your property is 100% tax credit, meaning you have no market units, you need to do a student update for all of your units. It's listed here. If there has been a rent update since your tenant's move-in year, you need to do a rent update here. If a household member has moved out and or moved in, you need to do a composition update. Properties in extended use are not required to complete annual student updates. However, you may choose to do so if you're planning to apply for OFA funding in the future. If your tenant moved from one unit to another in the same property, you will need to do a transfer event. You would choose transfer out as the event type. Devco gives you unit options to transfer your tenant into once you pick the event type. So here we have the transfer to building. So you would pick a bin, and once you pick the bin, it'll give you the open units for that bin. You have to make sure the unit you are trying to transfer into is vacant before you do this event. If not, that particular unit will not appear as an option. I'm just going to delete this event. We're not doing anything. Okay, for an actual rent update, again, we had a question about a rent update. So you would click Add New Event and put the date in of the rent update. Click Rent Update, and it opens up the appropriate fields you're able to change. So if there's been any changes to the tenant rent portion or the federal rental assistance amount or any of the open fields, you're able to change it along with the utility allowance. And then you would just push Update at the bottom. Again, I'm just going to delete this. Okay. And the last event type is a move out. Again, you would just put in the move out date and select move out here. If you had a tenant that lived in a unit in 2015 but also moved out during the year, you need to record this in Devco. Make sure the move-in event is entered in Devco before you enter the move out. If you had a tenant move in the same unit after this, you will need to add them as well. I want to reiterate that we are concerned with all events that happened during the 2015 year. If you're trying to enter all of your move-ins, then all of your move-outs, this will create errors on your unit status. And again, you can see your unit status by clicking on the actual unit number. And the status here shows occupied or vacant. Events should be entered in chronological order. So to ensure that information is stored properly in Devco, we recommend adding events unit by unit. And I'm just going to return to the property details page. If you have a compliance software and are planning to do an upload of your XML file into Devco, you can do this here. We will not be demonstrating an XML upload process today. Again, please note that the import feature is not available at this time. This feature should be active after the holiday next week. Sorry, I meant to say import event, not export. When it is available, you will click on Import Event, and from there you can select a file to upload. You will likely have a few errors initially. If the upload is successful, you will have to select the utility allowances for each unit. Once completed, you should receive a message stating "Successfully saved XML data," and click Done to complete the process. If you are having trouble uploading your XML file or have any questions, please contact the Devco Help Desk. Rachel Grass will be presenting the next section about property errors.
Okay, so from the property details page, at the top you'll have an alert about issues with your tenant data. So that's the link up here that says there are 19 errors for this property. You'll click on that link and then you can review the errors that the property has. There will be a severity listed with each of them. It'll either say warning or error. If the severity is a warning, you are able to finalize your tenant data with the issue listed. If the severity of the error is an error, if the severity is an error, you have to correct the issue before you can finalize your tenant data. Both types of issues should be reviewed to see if they can be resolved. If the tenant data is correct, please disregard the warning. If it is an error, you need help correcting the issue, please contact the Devco Help Desk or your designated OFA staff member. We will take a moment and go through a few of the examples of errors and warnings that we have here. The first one is the income exceeds county AMI income schedule. This is an issue that you will always want to review. Make sure that the income amounts for the household members, which are down here, and the total household income are listed correctly, and double check what the correct limits are for your property. We are still working on correcting some issues for the properties with project-based assistance having the wrong limits, as well as a few other limit-related issues. So it is possible that you are receiving this income error even when you should not. And the same applies to the income exceeds 140%. You're going to go back to the list now. You will also see an allowable rent exceeded limit potentially. Please make sure that your tenant's gross rent is not over the limit. This includes the tenant rent portion and the utility allowance. Also, since the rent limits are selected in a similar way to the income limits, you may receive this error when you should not. We are working hard to get the logic used corrected. For a trust-only property, note that all limit-related issues can be ignored. And again, that's only if the property does not have tax credits. We'll also take a look at the total household income is 0. This is flagged because the total household income listed on the event is 0. And this is just making sure that everything was entered. We know that there are some folks out there that do have 0 income, but the system wants to make sure that you entered everything. The tenant rent portion and rental assistance being 0 is also another common issue listed. And notice for this that there is not a warning or error text listed with it. This issue is meant to be informational only. However, you should watch out for this issue if it is a transfer event like the first 3 that we have here. On transfer events, not all of the fields are automatically populated when the transfer in is created, so you'll need to make sure that you do not miss getting the information in the new unit. The last one that we'll look at is the utility allowance is required. This warning occurs when the utility allowance is not selected on an event. So we have our utility allowance drop down here. If, like in this example, the utility allowance is not available in the drop down, it is usually caused by one of two things. Either there is not a utility allowance available that would be effective when the event occurred, or the bin is not listed on the utility allowance. In a moment, I will show where these issues can be resolved for the utility allowance. So I'm going to go back to the property details page, which you can always access by clicking on the property name. The utility allowances should be reviewed to make sure that they are entered correctly for the reporting year. If you had owner-paid utilities, they need to be marked on the building details page. So that means selecting each one of the bins and then checking this box for owner pays utilities. To access the utility allowances that you have entered in Devco, you'll click on Utility Allowances on the right. From here, you should be able to see all utility allowances that are currently active in Devco. Utility allowances that were used anytime in 2015 need to be added to the system. You may need to add your 2014 utility allowances if the effective date for your 2015 allowances are after January 1st of 2015. Utility allowances need to be entered for each type of allowance, not by unit or bin. So each type meaning the bedroom size or the apartment layout. For example, garden versus townhome, 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. And we have examples of those here where we have 2 bedroom garden and a 1 bedroom flat. To enter a utility allowance, you click Add New. The description of the utility allowance should be as detailed as possible. This is the field that's used when you're working on the events or doing a XML upload. You won't have the effective date available at that time when you're entering the events. So you want to make sure that you have as much information in that description field as possible so that your utility allowances are easily identified. Make sure you have the correct effective date when you're entering a new allowance, as well as the bedroom size and the allowance type. Each field must be completed when listing a particular utility. So that means selecting the source, entering an amount, selecting if it's owner paid or tenant paid, and in most cases you're going to be marking tenant paid, and then selecting your allowance type. And this allowance type should match what you have listed at the top. Once you've entered the correct figures, choose the appropriate bins for the utility allowances on the left side. If you do not identify the correct bins for your utility allowances, they will not appear when you're adding an event for the unit. So now we're going to move on to from finishing the reviewing of everything and go to the submission. So I'm going back to the property details. After you've reviewed the tenant events and resolved the errors and reviewed your utility allowances, it is now time to begin the Finalize year process. This is how you submit your tenant data to OFA. If everything is in order, this is a fairly simple process. And you start from the property details page, which we're on now. Select Finalize Year. The text here is asking you if you're ready to finalize or not. And you'll begin the process by clicking Start Finalization. If you have errors at this point, you will need to get those corrected, as well as trying to correct as many of the warnings as possible if there is still something missing. If you get stuck with an error message and aren't able to figure out how to remove the error, you can contact the Devco help desk. Note that once the Finalize year process is started, the property is now in a property review status, which means that you're no longer adding events but are confirming that everything that is needed is included before you submit. So because we have just warnings here and there's no errors, we can continue on. However, these warnings may come up again when the analyst completes the compliance checks that are part of the annual owner reporting review process. And a warning could be listed in one of the findings letters, although not all of the warnings that are possible in here are included in letters. So I will click Proceed to finalize. The screen here is now wanting you to confirm that you are ready to finalize. So click Finalize. After the submission is complete, the Finalize button that was on the property details page will become a receipt button. And you are now viewing that receipt. It is a good idea to print this receipt as well as saving an export of the events for your records. In addition to the receipt being available, the property will now have the status of finalized for the reporting year that you have completed. So here you can see the date that it has been finalized on. And this receipt is strictly for the tenant data. As a reminder, there are other statuses in Devco that are used for annual reporting. You have the active status. This means that the property is open for the certification year, and that's what it should start out each year. The property review status. The property has started the finalization process, but is not finished. Finalized, the property has been finalized for OFA review, and editing is no longer possible at this point for that reporting year. A monitoring status means that OFA is reviewing the property's annual owner reporting. There's also a second status that OFA uses for reviewing. It's called resolution. It's used far less though. Completed is when the property has the finalization complete and it has been approved by OFA and has the AOR review process closed for that certification year. We will now take a look at the second part of the annual owner reporting submission. This is the annual owner certification. So you go back to the property details, and in Devco it's called the annual certification. You will have 3 pages of this online form. The first page is the property general information, which summarizes your property, and you should identify any changes that have occurred during the year to the site, which is the first 2 questions, the project information and the unit. So I've marked yes already for both of those, which means that everything is up to date and current, as well as any changes to the ownership or management. And I'm going to indicate that there was a change for management, that there's now an on-site manager. It is a good idea to also include the phone number and email just to make sure that we have those in Devco. And if they're not there, they will get updated then when the contact is added. And so I'm double checking that the owner information has not changed, so that's left as yes. And these answers were already here because I had saved the information and went back to it. Anytime that you're working on the certification, you can click Save at the bottom, and that means you'll be able to come back to it later with all of the answers that you've done so far. So I click Next. Now you're on the annual certification. This is where you're asked questions that are covering the requirements that you must meet for the tax credit program or one of the gap financing programs. To begin, select the certification types that apply. So I'm going to select tax credit and gap financing. And while you're selecting, you can press Control. This will highlight more than one at a time. You should only need to select one or two of the choices based off of the funding at your property. For the extended use, these are a shortened list of the tax credit questions. So I click Load. Now all of the questions are available. And you can go down through all of the questions listed. Take time to read through each question as you're answering them. Also note that several of the questions may require additional documentation to be submitted. Here's an example of where you may need to include an explanation. Because this is a test property, I'm not going to really type any explanation in. With the question number 7 here, this is talking about a fair housing finding. This is an example where you would have to email additional information to your compliance analyst. For this particular question, it's requesting a copy of the finding. You will receive an additional reminder at the end for any questions that require additional documentation. Once you've answered all the questions here, you will have your third page, which is how you submit the annual certification. And again, like the previous page, click Next. We are now on the Submit screen. This page serves as the electronic signature for completing the submission and should be completed by an authorized agent or signatory for the property. Complete the required fields and select Submit. So we're clicking Submit. You will now receive a message about any additional documentation needed. This same alert will also be listed on the bottom of the page down here with the red text, and it can be viewed at any time that you return to the page after the submission is complete. There will also now be a timestamp at the top of the page when you return to the page or when you're viewing one of the other 2 pages that are part of the annual certification. You should now select Print to save or print this for your records. This brings up an Excel-based document that'll include all of your answers that you completed on the annual certification. And to save it, the best option is to click the Export button and select PDF. Depending on how your print settings are set up on your computer or what internet browser that you're using, you may not have the print option working. So this is what the receipt for the annual certification looks like. At any point or after you have completed a submission, if you need the annual certification made active, you can contact the Devco help desk or your OFA staff member providing your technical assistance with the 2015 reporting submission to have it made active. And to recap, I'll show also how you can access the help information that's available on our homepage. Before I go through the help information, we just had a question on the printing. If you forget to print, you have to go back through all 3 screens, but you're just clicking Next and then selecting your certification types to get to this screen to print. This button will always be available once you have submitted the certification. You can access any of the videos or the compliance guide from clicking the help link at the top of Devco. This is available at any point when you're in Devco, and it'll open up in a separate window. It brings you to the help desk, which is where you can submit questions that you're having. But from there, you can also go to the compliance user guide or to the Devco videos. This brings our presentation to an end. We thank you for attending today's Tenant Data webinar. We will start answering some of the questions that were submitted. I see that someone has listed a couple of properties that they're having error messages on move-outs. We will look into that, and you can also contact the Devco help desk and add it as a question there so that we can keep track of it. There are a couple things that can potentially be done to resolve move-outs that have errors. We have a question about being able to print reports for the correctness of the information. So the best features for checking what you've done are the export events feature. This gives you a summary of everything that you have entered. And if you're looking for specific errors, you'll want to check out the error link at the top of your property. There's a few questions listed related to current residents and what information is needed in previous years for them. You have to list the move-in for any current resident, but then you can move forward to the current year. You should really have the 2014 information entered as well, since you were required to enter 2014, but you can move forward to 2015. There's also several questions listed here about the rent changes. OFA is starting to want to see when you have any rent changes. We're aware that that does happen a lot on properties that have Section 8 with the tax credits, that there are usually frequent changes to their rent throughout the year. But we do want to see those rent changes listed. We have a question about when you're entering an annual recertification. The recertification includes the student status update. If you're doing a recertification, you will not need to do a student update unless they had a change in their student status at some other time during the year. We have a question about when a transfer should be done instead of a move out or move in. This all depends on what you have listed on the 8609s for your property and whether the property has each building considered its own little property for the purposes of the IRS and the tax credits, or if your whole property is functioning as one for that. If you have each of your buildings as its own little property based on the 8609s, you will have to do move outs and move ins. Otherwise, you will be able to do transfers between the buildings. If you're transferring within a building, you can always do transfer ins and transfer outs. And that's if it's within a building. There's a question here about when rent updates should be done or student updates in relationship to the lease renewals. If a property is 100% tax credit, You will need to do annual student updates. And again, that's if the property is in its first 15 years. Extended uses are not required to do student updates. Rent updates would be done separately based off of whenever the rent is changed. And that rent update could include changes to the tenant rent portion, the utility allowance, or the rental assistance. I've seen a question also for a composition update and a rent update. The composition update should include the rent update. This was an issue with last year's reporting that we have fixed, or it should be in the next release, I believe. So for your composition updates, you should be able to change the rent at that point, and you won't need to list the rent update as a separate event. I see a question also listed about Microsoft Internet Explorer and the browser being version 11. Currently, Devco supports 10 or older for Internet Explorer, and it can also use Firefox. However, there are some few issues with how things are laid out when Firefox is used. But with version 11, you are going to have issues using Devco. There are a couple ways that you can set the Internet Explorer back to an older version, and I can send you that information for the person that had that question.
Extended use property question, and all vote is good. It says we only put rent updates for extended use properties.
We had a question about extended use. Rent updates will be the most common update that you're listing. You should also be listing any move-ins or move-outs that you have at the property also. And it is possible that you will have some units that have no activity for that year because they didn't have a rent change or there was no move-ins or move-outs. The reason that we're requiring all rental activity to be reported for extended use is that we're starting to do inspections on the properties, and we need to have that information available for the current tenants that are at the property. So I'm going to answer one more question, and that'll bring a close to our webinar. I see a question here that's highlighting with an XML upload. The software is not being able to distinguish between a rent update, a composition update, and a student update. There will be more information coming out next week about the XML upload process, and the person listed that they will come across as a composition update in the XML file. This is correct. We are working on a fix so that after the upload is completed, you can look at all of those composition update events that you have listed from the XML and change it to one of the three event types, either the rent update, composition update, or student update, based off of what you have in your records. But it'll be an extra step after the upload is completed. All right, thank you for joining us on the webinar today, and have a wonderful afternoon. And we will have a follow-up email with the questions that weren't answered today.